Start. So I'm pretty excited. I didn't anticipate so many people coming. Is this echoing or is this all right? Can you hear me up the back? Cool. I remember trying to organise dribble meetups in Melbourne like 6-7 years ago, and the most people I ever had turn up to one of them was like 8. So I think it's really cool what Sean, Mel and Adam have been able to build and nurture over the last couple of years. It's a really exciting opportunity for me to come and talk a little bit about what we've been working on. Originally, this chat was called Design-Led Banking. I didn't put a lot of thought into it. I just was going to come in and pretty much demo a lot of the features that we'd built and the design processes around that. As I was fleshing out the keynote, this recurring theme just kept coming up the more I was trying to tailor it for a DesignOps crowd. So I ended up rejigging the chat a little bit. It's not a complete bait and switch, but this talk's more called designer developer empathy. And for me personally, in my journey with DesignOps, that's sort of one of the most key dynamics that I've seen, and it really is kind of make or break in terms of the quality of the output. And so I'm going to talk a bit about that tonight, but I'm still going to demo some stuff. So a rough outline of the chat tonight. I'm going to talk a little bit about me, what I've been doing as a designer since I started, a little bit about my DesignOps journey. Most of that was before DesignOps was even called DesignOps. I'm going to then move into up, how it came to be. I'm going to chat about the team and how the makeup of the team affects how we do design and influences the process, and then I'm going to get into some demos. So it starts off a bit dry, but I pick it up around here and I really bring it home towards the end. So full disclosure, I studied programming. I always thought I was going to be a programmer as a teenager. It wasn't until I was at uni in a room with other really good programmers that I realised I wasn't very good at it. But I stuck the degree out and I finished, but I was always very conscious of that I'd made a mistake, or that there was a lot of money to spend on Hex to realise something pretty fundamental about yourself. But I met a guy at uni, he's here tonight, he's in the grey up there, and we left and we started a small little partnership design agency. It's 2010, it's an old photo, and it was called Peacock Studio. It seems to be a trend at design meetups where you put up a website you designed ages ago and everyone laughs at it. So this is what we came out with. And we were targeting sort of front-end UI, but mainly a lot of the early work was small, medium businesses, just after some marketing websites, so a lot of static stuff, and a little bit of branding. And we were after some cheap office space, and we ended up working out of this place called Inspire 9. It was literally 200 metres down Dover Street. Started in a small townhouse, there's only 8 of us. And it also happened to be the central hub and community for tech in Melbourne and startups, and there's a bit of a Rails Ruby community and all that kind of stuff. It quickly outgrew it and had to move to this building where they still are now. I think they've got 2 floors there. It's the old Australian Knitting Mill building. It's really cool. And even just in that photo, just a few shout outs. That's Pat Allen, who's pretty prominent in the community. You've got Glenn Madden, who launched Good Films. We did a bit of work on that. There's also Michael and Bernie, who do Rome to Rio. It's still going now and it's killing it. And just outside the frame of this photo is the 4 Culture Amp founders, which is just a bit to the left. So it was all happening there. And we started doing those small static websites, but then over time we started doing more and more work for people inside the office because we were really into product, really into UI, really into interface. And it was kind of funny, it was such the central hub for tech that Inspire 9 ended up launching an incubator called Angel Cube. So they were just being served up to us on a platter. Twice a year, they'd handpick 8 startups, and they were always usually tech co-founders and often looking for design work. And so in terms of my DesignOps journey, it's sort of in this sort of collaboration type thing between designers and engineers, or designers and developers. It really started off in this team size. It was client work. They were usually founders or tech founders looking for a bit of a design pass on their concept. After a couple of years of doing that, we ended up closing down Peacock Studios and going our own way. Christian went travelling for a couple of years, and I ended up taking a job with one of the clients that I really enjoyed, which was Adioso. And does anyone here remember Adioso? Anyone heard of it? Oh, cool. Yeah, they were a Y Combinator startup based in Melbourne, natural language flight search. I really enjoyed that. And this was kind of the new dynamic I was starting to learn as a designer. I was still the only designer. Sometimes there was one other, the Blues are designers, by the way. Sometimes there was another creative, but that was kind of the team size and dynamic and collaboration that I was getting used to for a number of years. And then after a couple of years of that, I ended up joining Culture Amp. I just ended up hopping from all these companies in the office, but they were in a completely different stage. They'd sort of proven their model, and they were all about raising lots of money and really ramping things up. So I joined them as employee, I think 17 or 18, And I was only there for a couple of years, and by the end, their headcount was like 150, and even now I think it's doubled again. So it's just a completely different sport. There's a lot of other designers, and so scale's the name of the game at that point. And that's when you start feeling a lot of the pain points as a designer in an engineering-driven company. So, which is, I think it's fair to say, DesignOps really tackles a lot of the issues that you face as a designer on that end of the spectrum. I've kind of introduced this as my career progression, but really a more interesting label on that x-axis is like not just team size or headcount, but also the development stage. A lot of this stuff at the beginning is discovery and experimental. So as a designer, you're just switching directions a lot. You're a bit of a generalist, all hands type thing. And then towards here, it's more implementation. And I think what I noticed and observed as a designer is that design was being much more appreciated in the tech and engineering company sort of field. And there's a few manifestations of this. This is a report that gets referenced all the time when talking about this kind of stuff. It's a Kleiner-Perkins. The data's a bit old. It goes back to 2017. But certainly the field is really starting to appreciate designers more. And this, one example of this is the ratios. So in 2012, Atlassian for every designer had 25 engineers, and then that quickly went down 1 to 9. They weren't getting rid of developers. They were hiring more designers, just to be clear. And it was happening right across the field. So it felt really good to be a designer, like sort of during this period. You could sort of feel, it was just a really good thing to see happen and unfold in real time. Another manifestation of this is, I know people's eyes are probably rolling, but this debate around should designers code, and I don't mean to rehash it tonight, but I certainly paid attention to it a lot over the years, and often you'd see two camps. You'd see sort of front-end engineers that sort of got good at design saying, of course you should learn how to code, you should be implementing your own solutions, and they didn't have a lot of patience for that. And on the other side, you had the real creatives and the graphic artists sort of saying, no, I'm never going to be that good at programming, so why should I burn time trying to close that gap? I'm never going to be as effective as some of the engineers that I work with. And my take on it is, it's not the point. You never expected as a designer to come in and write production level code or get on GitHub and start reviewing PRs. The point for me is all about empathy. And so the more you understand about code, the more you understand about developing, the more you can understand sometimes how painful it is that your solutions are proposing, how 1 hour of your sort of concept can turn into 20 hours for an engineer. And the more you sort of cover this ground, the better it is for the relationship and the collaboration. You're not really handing stuff over or tossing stuff over the fence to developers. You're certainly collaborating with them a bit more once you've got this under your belt. Anyway, so that's my take on that debate. Anyway, moving on to Up. So who is using Up at the moment? Oh, wow. I was expecting at least 6 because I brought them with me. But for those that don't know about Up, it's Australia's first digital neobank. We've been live since October 1. And it's a collaboration between two companies, Ferocia and Bendigo. Ferocia is the company I work for. And it's a software company based out of South Melbourne. It's 100% independent, so there's no VC backing. And I'm sure you've all heard of Bendigo Bank. It's Australia's 5th biggest retail bank and a publicly listed company. And Up isn't the first time these two companies have collaborated. It's just going to provide a bit of context. It becomes relevant later, but this is, we've built Bendigo's banking platform, and that started back in 2012. We call it Project Joanna. I won't go into why it's named like that, but it's just an internal name. So whenever I mention Joanna at this talk, that's what I'm talking about. But it started around 2012, and Bendigo, I wasn't working for Ferocia at the time, but Bendigo had missed the boat on mobile, and they were looking to, I suppose, address that situation as quickly as possible. So Ferocia pitched a vision on what they thought mobile banking and sort of desktop banking could be. I think at the time it would have been called e-banking. And so they shook hands and away they went. I'm told we thought it was going to be live in 6 months. It ended up taking 2 years. Anyone who's worked in software sort of knows that can easily happen. But it launched in August 2014, and so began the iterative process of just continually improving it. And it's something we still work on today. And something sort of happened around this period here, 2015, 2016, where around the world, banking regulations were starting to be relaxed a little bit, especially in the UK and stuff like that. So it spawned these really cool progressive digital neobanks, Monzo, Starling, N26, Revolut. Even in America, there was one called Bank Simple that we'd kept our eye on for a while. And so after you've built a banking platform and you're starting to see all these kick-ass digital banks around the world, the seed was definitely planted. And I was speaking to our head of product about it, who's here tonight, Anson Parker, and he was trying to summarise the sentiment of the team at that point. And it was, what could a banking platform look like if it was built from scratch using the best capabilities and technologies, free from legacy? And so this desire became really strong, obviously, and this is the driving force about how Up came to be. There's a part of this quote that I think's interesting to think about. We obviously, most of us here work in the industry, but a lot of people out there don't, and it's this terminology like free from legacy. It means different things to different people. We obviously have a meaning that we place behind the word legacy in tech, but when I'm talking to friends around what I work on, they don't really realise how that banking's broken or that it's not really great. They apart from the Royal Commission and all the moral and ethical stuff, which I won't go into, but in terms of speaking purely just product and the solution, I can log in, I can pay my bills, it's fine. And the thing that it reminds me of is when I was working in that co-working space, that's where Uber Melbourne launched. It was a table of 3 dudes, and we'd heard a bit of the buzz around Uber from the Valley at that point, so we were sort of keeping a big eye on them. And it was a few years ago now, and they were handing out vouchers, and I remember trying to give my friends these $20 Uber vouchers, and they couldn't quite wrap their head around it. Like, hang on, so I get in a car with a stranger, and it's not really until you use the app and you have all these aha moments like, oh, of course, like prior to this, you just call the cab company, the cab comes, or you hail them in the street. But then when you use the app, you're like, oh, of course I should be able to see a map and set exactly where I want it to pick me up. Of course I should be able to see when the driver's on the way and how far away they are, and what they're, a photo of them and their rating. Of course I should be able to see a listing of all my transactions. And this is kind of the best example I can think of when thinking about banking at the moment, because you've got, this is a pretty contrived example, but often if an FPOS machine is not set up right, or if a franchise is set up under a weird ABN, often you can just be looking at a transaction like this in your banking, and it's fair enough. Like, it's got the date. South probably means South Melbourne. That's where I work. It's got an amount. But it's when you're using Up that you start to realise a lot of those same things. And so, like, of course I should be able to see what merchant that is. It's Nando's. Of course I should be able to see the logo. Of course I should be able to see a timestamp. That's context. It's 1 p.m. That's lunch. Of course I should be able to tap on that transaction and see more around this transaction. So categories. I should be able to add tags. Of course I should be able to see history with this merchant. I should be able to navigate to these transactions. Yeah, okay, all right. I ate a lot of Nando's. It says the 4 grilled tenderloins with the lemon. Anyway, whatever. So, this seems really obvious when you're using it. Like, of course I should be able to do this stuff when I'm using banking. And so this is the sentiment of the team. Once we understood what it took to launch a bank, and we built one, we fought really long and hard to sort of get the opportunity to execute on this vision. I'll chat a little bit around the team. So it's the first thing people are surprised about when we describe our team is that we're a uniquely small, agile team. That spectrum that I pointed on before with all those growth sort of tech and disruption, sprinting and runway and all that shit, we don't really sit on that. Where it's like a self-imposed constraint that we want to remain small. We really enjoy a lot of the benefits that come with it. And namely, there's just no communication overhead. So we're not having to traverse an org, departments, have these big all-hand meetings and verticals sort of giving there's none of that. We have access to everyone that we need. It's really relationship driven. So half of the company have been with the company for 4 to 5 years. So at times it can feel a bit like a family. It's pretty challenging. There's a lot of feedback, a lot of strong opinions. I call it positive conflict, but it's all in the consensus that produces the best result. It's a really close-knit team. We eat together every Monday, Wednesday and Friday. We have lunch. And our founder, Dom, always says, if you don't know the name of everyone's partner and the kids, you probably need to have a look at your team size. I think Jeff Bezos goes a bit further and says the team should be fed by 2 pizzas. I don't know how we'd go with that, but there's certainly this trend towards all the benefits you get being in a small team. My favourite perk of being in a small team is the visibility. I'm going to elaborate a little bit on what I mean by that. What I don't mean is smashing Slack with out here's and FYIs and announcements and here's info if you want it. We use and we love Slack, but when we talk about visibility, we mean more of the tangible stuff. So we do stand-ups every day, like a lot of teams. But they're genuinely all-hands meetings. You can see everything that's being done. There's a few people in that photo that are here tonight. And so you can see if you're blocking someone because they're unable to move forward. You can see if someone's working on a problem that you're interested in. It's an incredible way every day to just have complete visibility of everything that's going on. And we do it against the biggest wall in the office where we have these sort of two things. I won't go too much into it, but basically, and my founder's here, so we've got some stuff on this roadmap that I haven't really run past him. But this is a makeshift board. It started off as just a roadmap, and it kind of evolved a fair bit. We just built this. It's kind of like our custom solution to Agile project management. It's not exactly a Kanban board, and we certainly have a card system in Trello and all that kind of stuff. But there's a difference between visibility and access, and just being able to walk past the wall every day to see what people are working on, see who's sick, see who's on leave, what's coming up. Things might have changed, as they always do. And say, yeah, this is a board that we built. It's evolved a little bit. It's actually probably gotten simpler and simpler over time. But it's been one of the longest standing tools that we've used as the team. We really appreciate it, and it's something that we use a lot. And it's kind of very deliberately on the left. We do stand-ups in the middle, and then we have an information radiator on the right. And so you can see the stuff coming in the roadmap, sort of the inputs, and the team works on it. And the information radiator ends up being the output, the result. And this has evolved a lot over time. Initially, so the goal here isn't OKRs and KPIs. It's really the objective this is a custom-built information radiator. The objective was, what's going to be most engaging for this team? What are they going to find interesting? The thing you always find with Gecko boards and information radiators is they onboard you, they plug you into, give us your Google Analytics, give us all your things, and then they just radiate into nothing. They're a bit boring. They're not like, they don't really survive. And so this is a custom-built information radiator that we curate and handpick. We have a back-end admin section that has all the stats that you can look at, but this is what it started out as, and this is sort of what it is now. Sometimes it's engagement, acquisition, sometimes it's just spending, sometimes it's how many merchants have been identified. We fight hard to sort of make sure that this is really engaging for the whole team, so that every day when they look at it, they feel connected between their chunk of the work and how it's feeding through. I cut out a few slides on our continuous delivery. It was a tall order for a room full of designers, but take my word for it. From day dot, Up's built a lot of its infrastructure solely around speed. It's a big thing for us, and it's important to know that as a designer, because you're never really taking a team of devs on this long walk of faith on a gut feel or an assumption. You're able to test things really quickly and a lot of the time, and I'll go into it a little bit, but we average an app release around every 10 days since we launched in October 1. And in that 10 days, we do around 50 deploys, so about 5 a day. These are the deploys. So there's native releases, which is the app release, and then there's 50 deploys, which is the underlying sort of the server-side stuff. And more interesting to us is the 5 test builds we get through TestFlight. We get one we average about one of them every 2 days. And the test builds is not prototyping or mock-ups. It's actually, we build the app, and it gets released to 25 of us internally, and so it looks a little like this. It's an excuse to get my dog in this talk. So we'll get a notification from TestFlight, and then we'll update the app, and then there'll be a bit of context. Oh, the new tagging system for transactions. So we'll look at an actual transaction that's real. We'll sort of play around a bit with it, work lunch, add that tag, have a look at it. And so this is happening 5 times every 10 days. And so we're able to sort of, one of the frustrating things when you're designing stuff is you're looking at a simulator on someone's screen, and they're using seed data, and you just constantly want to say, I want to touch it and feel it, and I want to see it with real data. And so we don't have to wait for big app releases for that to happen. And we don't really have a large testing team. We've just got one tester, and she's a gun. She's here tonight. It's half her job. She also manages support. And so we've really leaned heavily on automated testing, no manual testing, so that from the get-go we can do stuff like this fast. This is to provide more context. This diagram gets shown a lot in the stuff. It's the Google Ventures design sprint. It's not a bad thing. I think it's really good. It talks a lot about prototyping and learning before you sort of, spending resources building and launching. But the way that we have it, we're able to build and launch with real prod data every time we want to run little experiments internally. It's really cool. I'm going to chat a little bit about design tooling. I don't really get into religious thoughts about tooling like some other designers. I used to think I've just come to accept that the new thing will come around every few years, but I was deep into Photoshop for a long time. I remember the first time I saw a coworker using Sketch and just how fast it was. It was built for UI. Photoshop was trying to bolt stuff on all the time, and we all know that. So I'm not trying to talk about why we should use Sketch instead of Photoshop, but certainly tooling for designers has gotten so much better in the last few years, and I think initially they were solving problems for us. but now I think they're moving more towards solving problems for teams. So, oh, I forgot I did this slide. So this is taking the piss out of, this is for me when the penny dropped, when this, this told me how saturated the market was for designers and tooling. There's all the memes about that this was directed by Michael Bay, and this is a designer tool. I just kept expecting like this summer. Yeah, it's crazy. This is the moment for me when I realised how many options we had as designers for tooling. But they've all kind of homogenised into this layout where you've got grouping and layers on the left, you've got an up, can't really see that, all right. You've got an artboard in the middle, and you've got your sort of, yeah, whatever. It's really easy to pick up all these apps quite quickly. You never become too attached to them because they're all solving your problems. It doesn't matter if that right section in the layout looks like this, or looks like this. Like in a week, you work it out. And so we never chose our tooling based on anything like that. Certainly, I'm sure we all remember this flow where you're going Sketch into that graph plugin into InVision. It was super painful. I was always waiting for Sketch to acquire InVision or InVision to acquire Sketch, and it kind of never really happened. And then Figma came along and did it all. And so we ended up running with Figma, and not because, I'm not going to go into a tooling comparison, but not because it calls artboards frames or because it calls symbols components or any of that kind of Apple stuff. There's one reason we chose it, and it comes back to the designer-developer empathy. When we were trialing it, we noticed that developers were getting involved a lot more. So this is the only reason we chose Figma. It runs in the browser. Don't try and go to that URL, I've obscured it. But yeah, that's the only reason we chose Figma. It was really interesting because we tried it for a few weeks and we were just pasting the link to tickets, and we just noticed we'd get these comments from devs like, oh, you haven't thought of this, or you broke this. And it was really interesting because it reminded me, or it made me realize that I didn't have to tell a dev to like go to Dropbox, find this sketch file, update your sketch. They just hate all that. It's just a huge barrier to any of that stuff. Whereas this, we definitely saw increased activity from devs when we started using it. It's a really impressive thing about Figma is how performant it is in the browser. I know this argument comes up a lot when you talk about it. I think it's just because Sketch is really shit now. Each update just got really worse, but it started off really good. I could see what they were trying to do. Cool, so now I'll get into some of the demos and the chunks of work that we did. The first thing that you'll usually tackle, or one of the early epics that you'll tackle as a designer when you're building an app from scratch, is navigation. And these 4 apps, what are they? Pinterest, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. We were pretty tempted to reach for the most commonly used pattern for nav, and that is in the bottom 10% here, the tab nav. And it's part of the human interface guidelines in Apple, and it's also really prevalent in Android as well. We'd used it before on Joanna, and the thing with banking is that they grow into these really big beasts, and you'll often end up just having one of these miscellaneous small sections in the tab nav. You can push that tab nav to 5 or 6 sections, that's fine, but we were never really in love with that, that standard. And so when we moved towards, so this is 18 months ago, these are wireframes and concepts. We certainly tried a bit of the tab nav stuff, but we really liked the idea and the interaction of being able to grab the whole screen and swipe it. We'd seen that in a few other apps, and sort of demoed this to the implementers and the front end and devs and stuff like that. And we started the collaborative process on how achievable would this be at the scale that we wanted. We built a prototype in Sketch, and it's really important, obviously, to build prototypes so you can articulate your vision and you're not just tossing something over the fence, but you are asking for that input and feedback from your devs saying, no, there's no chance it's happening, or yeah, okay, I can see what you're trying to do, and you can iterate towards it. So this is just built in principle. You notice the little notification bubble. That was a problem we had to solve. What happens if there's a notification in a section that's out of the viewport? And we thought, oh, we could try this little cute thing. And so we really liked this when we started using it. It was frictionless. It was easy to use. We could yeah, it's not using up a big chunk of the screen statically stuck to the bottom there. And the other thing we really liked about it, because we're trying to innovate and we're not really married to a lot of the stuff that we do, and we know things can change in the future, it was really extendable. So if at some point we want to do mortgages or credit card or joint accounts or whatever, you'd just be able to slot in another section. You don't have to like redo your whole information architecture or have this little more section, like an elbow part of the app. This was really appealing to us in the way that we do work. And yeah, it's a pretty core interaction to the way this is the app now as it is. And you can see it's pretty true to the original vision. And so yeah, that was one of the first things that we worked on. The next thing we worked on is a Signup Flow. We had a really big, hairy, audacious goal. Our head of product said, I want to allow users to download, install the app and have a bank account in under 5 minutes. And the example we kept to help visualize it was, wouldn't it be cool if there was someone at a cafe, they saw an up promo, it says, here's $5 if you enter this code. They were able to fully sign up, verify their identity, fund their account by Osco and be provisioned an Apple card, an Apple Pay card instantly. And then by the time they get to the front of the line, buy a coffee. So, I mean, that really was our reaction to that initial goal. And the thing about a banking, a sign-up form for a banking app, I mean, most apps onboarding is just name, email, set a password, and away you go. We had a huge amount of data capture, and we wanted to make it really mobile friendly. So instead of we wanted to make it atomic, so there was one input per screen. We were really conscious of how many screens we were going to have. We didn't want a tall list of inputs that was going to be like a form. So this one was a pretty intimidating task at the beginning, both for the designers and the developers. We iterated on the visuals, the copy, the content, the structure. We trimmed a lot of the fat. We were challenging sort of every screen. We don't ask for gender. We don't ask for title. We just knew that those weren't important in the context of this. What's the sort of the leanest process that we can go through to really tighten this up? And we ended up, averaging out 2 minutes and 18 seconds. So we completely smashed the goal for the sign-up process. And it's the thing we get the feedback from the most in terms of how slick and straightforward it is. And I mean, it's the thing that everyone sees, so it's worth the investment. But that journey for both the designers and the developers, there's a lot of stuff going on the hood. Verifying identity, forking things based on driver's license or passport, international students, all this kind of stuff was really, that was a really big challenging chunk of work. It was around this time that we engaged an agency based in Windsor called CIP, and their creative director, Pete Johnson, who's here in the white. And so we weren't able to focus a lot on our brand. We sort of got our brand up and running in terms of a logo and a colour palette and that kind of stuff, but he was starting to develop it and take it even further. And you might have noticed a few of the flourishes through the presentation so far, like the illustrative style, the really energetic, bold, youthful, like colouring and stuff. And we wanted to start, that was getting really well received out on our marketing collateral, so we wanted to start integrating that more in the app. And so it started off modestly, just with little icons and illustrations like that, this frame-by-frame animation style. But then we started to identify some things as Pete came up with this concept of an up-year moment. There should be a lot of up-year moments throughout your relationship with this app. And certainly the first one would be when you go through this lengthy sign-up process. It's not lengthy, it's 2 minutes and 18 seconds, but you get this summary screen, you agree and submit, and we used to just take you straight into the app and away you go. So, no, that's an up-year moment. And so we started injecting a lot of the branding and the personality into the flow. What happens when you sign up successfully. And our users love this. We get feedback on this all the time. Just banks don't think to do stuff like this. And it became a real, not a focus, but genuinely a consideration on anything that we did within the app. And so throughout all our empty states, all our information screens, just injecting more and more of this kind of personality and this style. Cool to say, this is a funny one. So if you had a Maslow's hierarchy of important features, certainly sign up and navigation is on the bottom, that's foundational. Pull to save is probably a little sprinkle on the top. I'll sort of get to how it came about. It sort of started with this idea that once we rolled out roundups on the transactions, we were able to clean up the transaction feed a fair bit. So you don't see the cents here, that's $58 whole. And so it made the activity feed look really good, but then it started to draw attention on where we weren't rounding off. And so our head of product sort of came through and said, wouldn't it be cool, it was just this sort of funny idea you have while you're getting a coffee, wouldn't it be cool if I could just somehow get that 78 cents and chuck it in a saver through some interaction? It's kind of like coming home and emptying your pockets of coins and chucking them in a jar, but sort of in a digital app experience. And it certainly wasn't a priority. It was a cool idea, but we kind of parked it. And we're like, there's a lot of stuff to build, but we love that idea. And sort of happening separate to this was, dev was sort of getting really buried on what's called silent push notifications, which is kind of like a method of updating information in the app without a notification. So Usually, if you're looking at old data in an email or a website, you'd have to pull to refresh. You'd have to do this interaction. But there's this new sort of technique coming out called silent push notifications, where you're sort of ensuring that every time you look at the app, you're looking at the latest version of information. And so he went on this adventure for like 2 weeks and sort of came back and said, I did it. We have silent push notifications. There's no more pull to refresh in the app. So as we were using the app and the test flight was sort of using it, and accidentally I think it's just a habit or an instinct to just pull to refresh all the time, and it wasn't there. And then we sort of came up with this, like, what do we do with this new interaction? And so we toyed with the idea of, okay, wouldn't it be cool if we can use that interaction and somehow link it to, I mean, I think originally Anson had the idea for this to just maybe press it or something, but we became really besotted by this idea. And of course, we started prototyping and working with the developers to know what's possible, how does interpolating work. And so we came up with a prototype, again, in principle, where as you're pulling, this isn't a fully built thing, it's just kind of toying around with the concept and how it felt. So this is just the balance in the main section, and if you pull down on it, we're able to fade out your dollar amount, focus on the 85 cents, and tell them to keep pulling, and then release to save. I was really nervous about this feature before we launched it for a bank. So we started working with CIP and Pete and Aaron, and sort of working on some of the visuals that we could do for it, whether we use the bolts. Wouldn't it be cool if we had a coin that sort of flicks off the page and lands in the savers? It sort of tells them where it went, so that it doesn't. So there's a bit of affordance to it. There's certainly discoverability to it. We knew that people would be finding this feature, but we wanted to sort of focus on how could we best communicate what the hell's going on. And so we ended up doing the test flight thing, running through with data. And this is what we came up with. Auto pull to save. And so they just took that 60 cents and they just flung it into a saver. We liked it so much that when you do it the first time, you want to do it again. So we made this decision to, all right, if you've got no more cents, we'll just do $1. So that would go from 906 to 905 and you'd keep going. And then we got sort of nervous. We lost our cool and said, well, what happens if they take their balance right down to $0? So we're like, all right, let's put a cap. If they don't have a balance, if their balance is less than $10, let's disable this feature. Like, all right, cool, that should do. So we snuck it out into a release, and the feedback was overwhelming. People loved it. And so pretty quickly, like I was really nervous. I don't know why I was nervous personally about this feature, but I just knew it's something that a bank wouldn't do, and it's just a bit of delight and sort of moving people's money, and they were going to be funny about it. But it was received really well, and so the tweets were coming in. This was within, I'm not even kidding, this was in an hour after we announced this release. People were sharing all this stuff. That was all it took for me to switch banks. All right, that's the killer feature for that guy. Something really funny that I found, someone cracked it when they couldn't do it anymore. So they found that $10 limit and they said, no, you allow me to put my account all the way down to zero. It's my choice. I should be able to go into overdraft if I want. And so this terminology started coming out. We were gamifying savings, which was interesting because to be honest, if I'm being fair, I don't think that was our intent initially. It was to sort of get rid of a bit of loose change. But when we started looking at the stats, and this is the most recent stats, this feature's been used almost 65,000 times. So we knew it would be discoverable, but whether it would have repeat use was a big relief for us, but it was really cool. It's also outperformed, so roundups is when a transaction happens and it's $7.60. We rounded up to $8 and we chucked the change into a saver. And so this was outperforming roundups in terms of dollars by tenfold. So yeah, that was one of the really cool things that we did. The last thing I'm going to talk about is payments. We launched without payments. We knew it was going to be the first thing that we would ship after launching. And it was to the dismay of a few users, and fair enough, it's a pretty big part of a banking app not to have in it. But we were super keen to get out early and learn as much as we can about transactions and spending. So we just figured we could hold tight for payments for a little while. This, it was a big focus for us straight off the bat. And so this chunk of work ended up going from payments, and it turned into what we call conversational payments. And so initially, because the pressure was on to ship something as soon as possible, we could have gone with the status quo on this one, and this is what all banks do. So to do a pay anyone, you add a name, BSB and account number, and away you go. And this would have sufficed, this would have been fine. No one would have complained that we do what every other bank does. The thing about payments to and from people is they don't really get differentiated in your statement or activity feed They just look like, so money coming from a friend looks exactly like you funding your account from another bank account. It's not really separated or highlighted. And the way the underlying infrastructure works is there's no sort of standard for how banks format. Everyone would see this. Sometimes it says deposit online. Sometimes it'll have some random reference number. Sometimes it'll be converted to all caps. Sometimes it'll allow, they'll combine the message into the transaction thing. And so it's kind of, just going back to that notion around legacy and banking, it's kind of not great. And so we had this, at the same time that this was happening, OSCO was being launched. Actually, I've got a good question. How many people have heard of OSCO or know what OSCO is? Okay, that's awesome. That's more than I thought. We were curious around what the adoption and comprehension was like on PID and OSCO. But this was a major upgrade was happening to the underlying infrastructure on how payments work between banks. It's called OSCO. And it's what PID leans on. And we were sort of aware and paying keen attention on what the capabilities of this were, because we were going to default to this as our primary, sort of primary way that we would use payments. And it really came down to, we started to believe, or we had a good understanding that payments are really conversations. It's often you're covering dinner and everyone's sending you this whole bunch of cash, and then you feed it looks a bit confusing, or you say you're contributing to a gift, or there's often a lot of context to sending money to other people, and it really fits the conversation model. So this is a really early wireframe on how we thought payments could look. Instead of having it all in the activity feed, we'd separate a section called payments, and you'd be able to see all your contacts, and you'd be able to tap on them, be able to easily send them money within a drawer, and then you can see the money that they've sent you and that you've sent them. This is we ended up adding more fidelity to this, again, through principle, to really articulate this idea and this vision that we had for what payments could be. Let's go through. Fill it out. Confirm it. And it would take you to this thread. And so this is an interface that everyone's becoming really familiar with because of all like WhatsApp, Messenger, and it's something that you use every day. And it makes a lot of sense when it comes to payments. And I think we demoed this, and you could instantly see all the engineers and devs start shifting in their seats because, like, it's cool. Yeah, it's a cool demo, but like, there's so many reasons why this is going to be hard to work, and mainly the mappings aren't there. So when money's coming into your account, it's not like SMS when the person who you don't know messages you. You have the means to message them back because the number came with the thing. You just send the message back. With payments, you've got no information about who it was and how you can send money back to them. So how's this conversation thing going to work? The tech just isn't ready for that kind of stuff. And any practical solution you come up with is going to be inelegant. And that was some feedback that this idea got at first. And it's really good. It's really good feedback. It's true. So we had to then, instead of giving up on the idea, we believed in it so much that we ended up accepting the idea that this would be a little bit inelegant and that we could ask the user for a little bit of help to make this vision sort of come to life. And what that was is identifying payments. And so money's coming in. We don't know who it is. There's a question mark. It's an unidentified payment. This is a similar visual treatment that we have to transactions that we don't recognise. We get them to identify the merchant. And so in this case, you can either say, it's me funding my up account. No, it's someone that I've already paid before, or it's a create new contact. So in this case, I'm just going to assign it to me, Wearne, merge contact, and away you go. And it's going to pull that payment into this conversation thread. So it's pretty frictionless. It's not asking for a lot. It's not very high involvement. Certainly the most trouble with, or the most challenging part of that is the communication of what's going on, just explaining this model. And so we believe it was worth the benefit of doing this, being able to send money, a drawer pops out, send a message. OSCO supports emojis and really long messages, I think 250 characters, maybe 480, something like that. We were really seduced by the idea that sending money to a friend was going to be that easy. And so that's what we've shipped with. And this conversational payments is going to be the foundation for all these product features that we got in mind, things like splitting bills, being able to do that from within a conversation, requesting money, sort of saying to someone, oh, you owe me $50, time to pay up, or even just payment responses, so that when someone sends you money, currently with this system, you have to send them $1. Just like I very cheaply with Christian, we send each other messages $1 at a time, just to sort of test this feature out. But you should be able to just give it a thumbs up. I'll say, yep, got it, thanks. You should be able to respond to that payment like you would in a conversation. And that sort of brings me to the end of the talk. Really want to drive home that thing around designer-developer empathy and how it's something that I've always focused in every role that the first thing I do it, in a new place I go, who are the front-end devs? I sit next to them, and I really invest a lot in that relationship because I know how much it can elevate my solutions and the execution of anything in general. A few further reading things. I wasn't able to touch on any of the print stuff that we've done, but we've got a really cool blog article there. I do a deep dive on our welcome pack. It's been really well received. We've also got a blog article coming in the next couple of weeks by our branding designer, Hannah. It covers a lot of the events that we did. So pause, packs, our launch stuff. That's one to keep an eye out for. I added this slide in about an hour ago. I had a few questions about our product roadmap, and if you have any questions about it, our head of product will be happy to field. But if you go to up.com.au and you tap roadmap, this is an interactive sort of, we call it the tree of up, and you're able to see what we're working on, what's coming up in the future. You see other companies do this with public Trello boards, and we sort of wanted to take it a little bit further and do this really branded experience.